Shaffer. On the night of April 1st, 2006, a 27-year-old medical student named Brian Shaffer went out drinking with a friend in Columbus, Ohio. He went into a bar at 1:15 in the morning and was never seen again. The bar was called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It was on the second floor of a small mall near Ohio State University, and the only way up was a single escalator. A security camera was pointed right at that escalator. It filmed Brian going up. It filmed every other person walking out of the bar that night, but it never filmed Brian leaving. The bar did have a fire exit, but the door only led into a construction site that was sealed off from the outside. There was no way through it. Police checked the site. They checked the roof. They watched the footage frame by frame. They found nothing. Brian's car was still in the parking lot. His wallet and phone were sitting at his apartment. But the story gets even stranger. Brian's father, Randy, spent the rest of his life searching for him. Every weekend, he drove out to the woods around Columbus and hung missing posters on the trees. In April 2008, 2 years after Brian disappeared, Randy was out hanging posters when a tree branch fell and killed him. It has been almost 20 years. Brian Shaffer has never used a credit card. He has never made a phone call. And he has never appeared on a single camera anywhere on Earth. The Sodder Children. On Christmas Eve in 1945, 5 Sodder children disappeared during a house fire in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Maurice, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty were between 5 and 14 years old. Around 1 in the morning on Christmas Day, a fire broke out in the house. George and Jenny escaped with 4 of their other children. The 5 youngest were upstairs, but the staircase was already on fire. The house burned to the ground in 45 minutes. But strange things had happened that night. The phone line had been cut, not burned. The family's ladder was missing and was found 75 feet away in a ditch. Both of George's coal trucks would not start, even though they had been working fine the day before. When the fire was out, the police searched the ashes. House fires almost never destroy human bones, but they found nothing. In 1968, 23 years later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man. On the back, someone had written, Louis Sodder. The family believed it was their son, who would have been 32. George and Jenny spent the rest of their lives searching for their children. They put up a billboard with the children's photos, and it stood beside the highway for over 50 years. They were never found. Frederick Valentich. In October 1978, a 20-year-old Australian pilot named Frederick Valentich was flying a small plane over the Bass Strait. He was on a short training flight from Melbourne to King Island. 47 minutes into the flight, Valentich noticed something in the sky above him. He called Melbourne Air Traffic Control and asked if there was another plane near him. The controller checked the radar. There was nothing there, but Valentich could see it. He told the controller it had 4 bright lights on it. It was passing over his plane at high speed, circling back around, and then hanging in the air above him. The controller asked him what kind of plane it was. Valentich said, "It is not an aircraft." Then his engine started to fail. Valentich said the thing was directly above him. The radio went silent. For 17 seconds, all the controller could hear was a strange metallic scraping sound. Then the call dropped. The Australian Navy and Air Force searched the Bass Strait for 4 days. They never found a piece of the plane. They never found his body. Frederick Valentich was gone. That recording is still online today, almost 50 years later. Pilots have studied it. Military investigators have studied it. UFO researchers have studied it. Nobody has ever explained what was hovering above his plane or what made that scraping sound. Lars Mittank. In July 2014, a 28-year-old German tourist named Lars Mittank disappeared from an airport in Varna, Bulgaria. He had been on a beach holiday with friends. A few days before, Lars was attacked outside a bar by 4 men. The beating burst his eardrum. A doctor told him he had a serious ear infection and could not fly until it cleared up. His friends went home without him. Lars stayed at a hotel near the airport. Over the next few days, his messages to his mother got stranger. He told her the 4 men were following him. They were going to kill him. He begged her to change his bank account so they could not get to it. A doctor gave him medication, and he told his mother he felt better. On the morning of July 8th, he went to the airport. He was in the doctor's office when he suddenly stood up, grabbed his backpack, and ran out. A security camera filmed the rest. Lars sprinted through the terminal and ran out a side door. He climbed over a tall fence at the edge of the airport, crossed an open field, and disappeared into a sunflower field. More than 10 years later, Lars Mittank has never been seen again. The footage of him running has been viewed millions of times. Nobody knows what made him run. Dennis Martin. In June 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin disappeared from a meadow in the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. He was camping with his father, brothers, and grandfather. That afternoon, Dennis and 3 other boys wanted to play a prank on the adults. The plan was to split up and jump out from different sides of the meadow. The older boys went one way. Dennis, in a red t-shirt, went the other way alone. His father watched him walk behind some bushes about 50 yards away. 3 minutes later, the other boys came out laughing. Dennis did not. His father started searching within minutes. Park rangers were called in with dogs. Within hours, dozens of people were searching. Within days, more than 1,000 were. The search for Dennis Martin became the largest in the history of the park. Over 1,400 people, including Green Beret, joined in. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. But the story gets even stranger. That same day, 6 miles away, a family of hikers heard an enormous scream coming from the woods. Moments later, they saw a rough-looking man walking through the bushes, carrying something dark and heavy over his shoulder. More than 50 years later, no trace of Dennis Martin has been found. Not a bone, not a shoe, not the red t-shirt his father saw him walk away in. Yves Godard. In September 1999, a 45-year-old French acupuncturist named Yves Godard rented a small sailboat from a port in Saint-Malo on the northern coast of France. He got on the boat with his 2 young children, Camille and Marius. His wife, Marie-France, was meant to be with them, but nobody ever saw her board the boat. The Godards never came back. When the police searched the family home, they found a large amount of Marie-France's blood. They found used morphine vials and bleach and cleaning chemicals all over the house. They later found more of her blood in the family's camper van parked outside. It looked like she had been hurt before Yves and the children ever left for the boat. A few days later, a slashed life raft washed up on the coast. A life jacket was also found, but it had been arranged too neatly to have come from a real shipwreck. The sailboat itself was never seen again. In 2000, fishermen in the English Channel pulled 6-year-old Camille's bones up in their nets. 6 years later, in 2006, the bones of Yves Godard were dragged up from an underwater trench called Herd's Deep in the same channel. Marie-France was never found. 4-year-old Marius was never found. The case was officially closed in 2012, but no one knows what happened to either of them. Jim Thompson. In March 1967, a 61-year-old American businessman named Jim Thompson disappeared while on holiday in the jungle highlands of Malaysia. He was one of the most famous Americans in Southeast Asia. Thompson had served in the OSS, the spy agency that became the CIA during World War II. After the war, he settled in Bangkok and rebuilt the Thai silk industry. He grew rich and designed his own mansion. He became friends with kings, celebrities, and politicians, and the press called him the Silk King of Thailand. On Easter Sunday, Thompson was relaxing at a cottage in the Cameron Highlands with 3 friends. The friends went to church. Thompson stayed behind. The servants heard him sit down on the porch around 3 in the afternoon. Then they heard footsteps on the gravel path leading away. Then nothing. Thompson had left his cigarettes behind. The pills he needed for his gallbladder were still in the cottage. He was wearing only lightweight clothes. The Malaysian army, jungle police, and hundreds of villagers searched the area for weeks. It was one of the largest manhunts in Southeast Asian history. They found nothing, but the story gets even stranger. 6 months later, Thompson's sister Catherine was beaten to death in her home in Pennsylvania. Her murder was never solved. More than 50 years later, neither case has been solved. Granger Taylor. In November 1980, a 32-year-old Canadian mechanic named Granger Taylor disappeared from his home on Vancouver Island off the west coast of Canada. He had restored a working steam locomotive when he was 14, and later rebuilt an old fighter plane from scratch. A few years before he vanished, Granger had built a life-sized model of a UFO in his backyard. It was made from a pair of satellite dishes, and he lived inside it. He told friends and family that aliens were speaking to him through his dreams. On the night of November 29th, the worst storm in British Columbia's history hit Vancouver Island. Granger got into his pickup truck and drove off into the storm with a load of dynamite. He left a note on his dresser. The note said, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams have assured me of a 42-month interstellar voyage. I will be back." Granger was never seen again. Search teams found nothing. 6 years later, loggers found a blast crater on a nearby mountain. Inside were pieces of metal from Granger's truck, a piece of his shirt, and a few small bones. The bones were never tested for DNA. They were later lost. Nobody can prove they were ever Granger's. Flannan Isles. In December 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers named James Duquette, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur vanished from a tiny Scottish island called Eilean Moor. The lighthouse had been running for only a year. The island was completely isolated, and the 3 men worked there in 2-week shifts. On December 15th, a passing ship reported that the lighthouse was dark. Bad weather kept the supply boat away for 11 days. When the relief crew finally landed, the lighthouse was empty. Inside, everything was clean. The beds were made and the lamps refilled, but the clocks had stopped. A half-eaten meal sat on the kitchen table, with a chair knocked over next to it. 2 sets of waterproof coats were missing from the hooks. The 3rd set was still hanging there. Outside, the west side of the island had been hit by something huge. Ropes had been torn off the landing, a heavy iron box thrown 40 feet up the cliff, and a stone weighing over a ton had been moved. All of this damage was over 100 feet above sea level. There were no bodies on the island. The 3 men were never seen again. The official report said a giant wave swept the men off the rocks while they were working, but nobody has ever explained why one of them ran out without his coat. The Sarah Joe. In February 1979, 5 Hawaiian fishermen disappeared at sea on a small fishing boat called the Sarah Joe. They had set out that morning from the island of Maui. A sudden, violent storm hit the area not long after they left. The 5 men did not come back. The Coast Guard searched 70,000 square miles of open ocean for 5 days. They found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no life jackets. 9.5 years later, A marine biologist named John Naughton was on a research trip to a remote atoll on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. The atoll was called Taongi. It was a tiny ring of empty coral islands in the Marshall Islands, more than 2,200 miles from where the Sarah Joe had started its trip. As he came ashore, Naughton saw the wreckage of a small boat washed up on the beach. He checked the registration number. It was the Sarah Joe. He walked further inland. Underneath a small grove of trees was a shallow grave, marked with a handmade cross. Someone had built it from driftwood and pieces of the boat. Inside the grave was a single human jawbone. Tests later showed it belonged to one of the fishermen, Scott Mormon. The other 4 men were never found. Nobody has ever found out who buried him. If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.